The morning sun spread a warm golden light over the sprawling estate of Caldwell Ridge. Nestled at the edge of a sleepy western town, the manor stood grand and white, with polished brass fixtures gleaming like trophies. Fields of wildflowers stretched toward the barn, where a white horse, lean but proud, stood still, watching the house. His name was Jasper. He had been with the family for nearly a decade, loyal, intelligent, and remarkably attuned to the rhythms of the household. Some whispered he could understand more than most horses, but folks chalked that up to rural fantasy. Jasper didn't need words. He had eyes, ears, and a memory like the sky, wide, quiet, and endless. Inside the mansion, voices echoed through wide marble halls. The air was still, the kind of stillness that came not from peace, but control. "Straighten your back, Clara." The voice belonged to Nathaniel Caldwell, oil magnate, investor, and the richest man for 50 miles in any direction. He stood tall, his silver hair immaculately parted, suit crisp even in the summer heat. At his side, his wife Miriam said little, her expression blank, her eyes distant as if always calculating. Clara obeyed. She always did. She was only 12. Slender, freckled, with soft brown curls and eyes too old for her face, Clara was not Nathaniel's daughter by blood. She was Miriam's from a previous marriage, a man who died young and poor, a legacy Nathaniel considered a blemish. "Don't look at me like that," he said without turning, noticing the girl's face in the hallway mirror. "I told you before. Earn your place. That's the only way this house respects you." Clara said nothing. Her shoulders dipped slightly, but not from defeat. It was the posture of someone learning how to carry pain without spilling it. Later that morning, Jasper lifted his head as Clara stepped outside toward the stables. Her hands were filled with hay, which she tossed gently into his stall. Though she wasn't allowed to ride him, Nathaniel made that clear, she fed him when she could. "Hey, boy," she whispered, gently stroking his muzzle. "You're the only one who looks at me like I belong here." Jasper nudged her shoulder in response. He could sense something in her, an ache too heavy for her small frame. His ears flicked toward the house behind her. Someone was watching. From an upstairs window, Nathaniel stared down. His lips curled, not in affection, but disdain. That evening, the Caldwells hosted a gathering. Men in hats and starched collars. Women with corsets and judgmental glances. Clara sat quietly in a far corner near the piano, her posture perfect, her presence invisible. When a boy asked who she was, Nathaniel simply said, "The help." Clara flinched but didn't correct him. Her mother sat across the room, silent. After the guests left and candles burned low, Nathaniel stood near the fireplace, swirling a glass of bourbon. "I won't have this girl make a fool of this household," he muttered. Miriam didn't answer. She never did. But her silence didn't mean she agreed, only that she had learned surviving Nathaniel was easier in quiet. That night, Clara was sent to her attic room without supper. The door locked behind her. Down in the barn, Jasper shifted uneasily, sensing something unspoken in the wind. Over the next few weeks, Clara was given chores no child her age should bear. Cleaning chimneys. Polishing floors. Scrubbing the horse trough in the dead heat of summer. Every day, she passed Jasper's stall, slipping him sugar cubes or simply whispering a few soft words. It was their quiet ritual. A friendship built without permission. But it couldn't stay that way forever. One afternoon, after tripping over a loose floorboard and shattering a porcelain vase in the study, Clara stood trembling as Nathaniel's boots clicked toward her. "That vase was older than you'll ever be," he growled. "You've disgraced this home enough." Before Clara could speak, he grabbed her wrist and dragged her down the stairs. Not to the cellar. Not to her attic room. To the old smokehouse. The one behind the barn. It had once been used for hanging meat. Now, it held rusted chains and the smell of damp stone. A small barred window let in only slivers of light. He threw her inside. "If you're going to live like a stray," he spat, "you might as well sleep like one." Then he shut the iron door and slid the lock. Clara didn't scream. She just curled into the corner, knees to chest, and stared at the line of sunlight crawling across the floor. From his stall, Jasper heard it all. The thud of boots. The click of the lock. The absence of the girl's voice. He snorted and kicked at the wooden wall. No one came. That night, under the stars, Jasper stood rigid near the smokehouse, ears twitching, eyes locked on the iron door. He had seen her go in. She hadn't come out. Clara remained locked for days. She was given scraps of food and cold water, always without a word. Nathaniel told the servants she was sent away to discipline school. No one dared question him. Jasper, however, watched every movement. Every tray. Every lie. Every silence. And he remembered. Because loyalty isn't just staying by someone's side. Sometimes, it's knowing when to break the rules to protect the one who loved you when no one else did. Clara had stopped counting the days. In the small, windowless cage behind the barn, time became strange. The iron door groaned with every change in temperature, expanding in the heat, tightening in the cold. A single shaft of light slipped through the vent above her head, tracking across the dusty stone like a sundial, but she had no way of knowing if it was morning or evening. Just light, or dark. She slept curled up on straw meant for livestock. The metal floor was cold even under her thin dress, and the air turned sharp after sundown. Her fingers, once soft from piano lessons her mother used to give her, were now rough and cracked. She didn't cry anymore. The tears had dried up, and with them, a kind of quiet defiance had taken root. And every day, like clockwork, she heard hooves outside. Jasper. He no longer stayed in his stall. At first, the stable boy, Eli, tried to corral him. But the white horse had grown strange. Restless. He pawed the ground near the smokehouse door, scraped his hoof against the lock, and brayed, not loud, but deep and long, as if speaking in a voice only the girl inside could understand. Eli gave up trying to contain him. He'd muttered once, half in fear, "That ain't no ordinary horse." Meanwhile, Nathaniel went on with life like nothing was amiss. He drank coffee on the veranda each morning, read telegrams from his business partners in Austin, and walked the property lines with his land surveyor. He threw a harvest ball and told guests that Clara had been sent east for character refinement. No one questioned him. Wealth covered sins like velvet. But Miriam, Clara's mother, had begun to fracture. She still said little, but her silence became heavier. Her eyes lingered too long at the window. Sometimes her hand twitched over the piano keys but never pressed them. She had learned long ago that speaking against Nathaniel meant bruises no one could see. Still, guilt gnawed at her. Jasper noticed. He began pacing more. One night, a storm rolled in from the west, sharp winds, rain slicing through the plains, and thunder that cracked like rifle shots. Nathaniel sat by the fireplace, polishing a silver watch. Miriam stood behind him, hands clenched so tightly the knuckles had gone white. "Storm will pass," Nathaniel said without looking up. Outside, Jasper was soaked through. He stood, unmoving, in front of the smokehouse. And inside, Clara began to shiver. By morning, the storm had broken trees and flooded fields. The staff were too busy mending fences and drying hay to notice Jasper was missing. He had vanished. Nathaniel didn't care. Horses could be replaced. Mares, stallions, all tradable. But Jasper wasn't headed for town or pasture. He was galloping east, toward the edge of town, toward a place only he had been before with Clara, long ago, the churchyard. 2 years earlier, Clara had taken Jasper on a secret ride. She hadn't been allowed to, but Miriam had smiled faintly and whispered, "Just don't get caught." Clara had ridden bareback, arms around Jasper's thick white neck, to the small white chapel where the pastor's wife kept jars of blackberry jam and old hymnals. They'd sat under the tall sycamore while she read stories aloud. Now, Jasper galloped through the same path. Mud splashed high around his hooves, and his coat was streaked with rain and dirt, but his eyes were fixed forward. He arrived at the chapel door just as the morning service ended. Reverend Hale, a wiry man in his 60s, stepped outside and blinked in surprise. "Well, I'll be." Jasper stood still. Soaked. Steaming. Staring straight at him. Is something wrong, boy?" Hale asked, stepping down the steps. Jasper turned. Took 2 steps. Looked back. Hale frowned. Then Jasper whinnied sharply. That was all the Reverend needed. It took 2 hours, a small wagon, and a very confused deputy to convince the sheriff that something was off at the Caldwell estate. But Jasper refused to move until someone followed. When they arrived, the white horse bolted ahead, leading the group straight past the mansion, around the barn, into the smokehouse. The deputy raised a brow. "That's a meat locker." "Open it," Hale said quietly. The lock was rusted but intact. The door groaned as it swung open. Inside, hunched in the straw, covered in a ragged blanket, was Clara. She blinked at the light. No tears. Just stillness. Jasper stepped forward and touched her cheek with his muzzle. The girl finally exhaled. Nathaniel came running the moment he heard shouting. "What the hell are you doing on my land?" he bellowed. But he froze when he saw Clara, and the white horse standing guard like a soldier returned from war. Hale turned slowly. "You locked a child in a cage," he said flatly. "She's not mine," Nathaniel said, shrugging. "And you've no proof You will not finish that sentence," came a voice behind them. It was Miriam. For the first time in years, her voice carried weight. "I told him she had a fever," she said. He said let her sweat it out. "I told him she cried in the night." He said children learn faster in darkness. "I told him she needed love." She paused, her eyes fixed on Jasper. "And that horse gave her more of it than he ever did." The sheriff said nothing. But he pulled out his handcuffs. Nathaniel flinched. "You can't, this is my property. I'm the law here." "You were," the sheriff said coldly. "But now the whole damn town's watching." From behind the barn, half a dozen ranch hands and townsfolk had gathered, drawn by the commotion in Jasper's trail. Some had known something was wrong. Now they saw it. That night, Clara slept in a warm bed for the first time in weeks. Jasper lay in the straw just outside her window, refusing to return to the barn. And in the morning, Miriam packed their things. They left Caldwell Ridge before sunrise, mother, daughter, and horse. They never looked back. The road away from Caldwell Ridge was long and silent. Clara sat beside her mother in the wagon, wrapped in a thick wool blanket someone from the church had given her. Jasper followed just behind them, not tied, not led, simply walking. Watching. Refusing to let distance grow between them. Miriam held the reins loosely. Her face was pale, her eyes ringed with sleepless shadows, but she never looked back. Not once. By dusk, they reached the edge of Dry Hollow, a modest town with red dust roads and fewer judging eyes. There, Reverend Hale had arranged shelter with an old widow named Lorna Bell, who offered them a room above her bakery. "I lost a son," Lorna said, setting warm cornbread on the table. "But that horse, the way he stood over that girl like a guardian angel? Well, you don't see loyalty like that every day." Clara didn't say much. Her voice had become small, like a lantern burning on its last bit of oil. But she smiled faintly when Jasper nudged her elbow, and her hand found its way to his cheek like it always had. Weeks passed. The townspeople grew used to the quiet girl with the bruised past and the horse that followed her like a shadow. Miriam took up work in the bakery. Clara helped sweep and deliver bread in the mornings. Her laughter returned slowly, like spring after a long frost. But Jasper, he never forgot. Every day, he stood at the edge of the field behind Lorna's house, staring east, toward the hills that rolled down to Caldwell Ridge. He didn't pace. He didn't whinny. He just stood. Watching. Because something in him knew it wasn't over. Back at Caldwell Ridge, Nathaniel Caldwell posted bail within 2 days. He paid the sheriff under the table, silenced the press with donation promises, and told every guest at his next gathering that the girl had run off and the whole thing was a misunderstanding. But the town had shifted. Whispers grew. The Reverend refused to speak to him. His ranch hands worked with half the loyalty they once had. And the sheriff, though bought, watched him now like a hawk. Still, Nathaniel refused to change. In fact, he stewed in his anger. He hadn't just lost Clara. He had lost control. One gray morning, 2 months after Clara's escape, Eli, the stable boy, found a strange piece of parchment nailed to the barn wall. It was a flyer. At first, he thought it was nothing. But then he saw the signature. A traveling trader. Someone who sold livestock. And under the inked words, crudely drawn, was an outline unmistakable. A white horse. Jasper. The note read. Wanted, stolen stallion. Valuable white horse taken by unfit former staff. Reward for information or return. Eli swallowed hard. He knew what that meant. Back in Dry Hollow, Lorna's bakery bustled with morning warmth. The smell of cinnamon rolls drifted through the cracked windows. Clara was humming faintly, something she hadn't done in months, as she arranged loaves near the front. Then she saw it. A man in a dark hat. On horseback. Holding a piece of paper. He pinned it to the community board. Then rode off. Clara stepped outside and read it. Her heart dropped. Miriam came out moments later and tore the notice down. He's coming, Clara whispered. He wants Jasper. Miriam's voice was low and firm. He can't have him. But they both knew better. Men like Nathaniel didn't accept defeat. That evening, Jasper grew uneasy. He paced the barnyard. Stomped his hoof. Refused the apple Clara offered him. Then, just before nightfall, he disappeared. Clara searched the field with a lantern, calling his name, but the wind stole her voice. He left us, she murmured, tears welling. He left. But Miriam stared toward the horizon. No, she said quietly. He's warning us. Jasper had galloped through the night. Back through the hills. Back to the estate he had once called home. But not to return. To witness. And what he saw chilled him. Nathaniel was preparing a carriage. Talking to a man in a dusty coat with thin, cruel eyes. A bounty hunter. Jasper recognized the scent of danger like a soldier senses war. He turned and ran. By dawn, a storm was brewing over Dry Hollow. The town was still quiet when Jasper thundered back through the fields, his coat muddy, his breath heavy. He stopped just outside Lorna's bakery and neighed, loud and sharp. Clara burst from the kitchen. Jasper? He walked straight to her and butted her shoulder. Then turned toward the road. Then looked back. She understood. They're coming. Sheriff Anders, the only lawman not on Caldwell's payroll, was already in the bakery by the time Nathaniel's carriage rolled into town. He stepped outside slowly, watching the men approach. Nathaniel climbed out in full black, coat tailored, face smug. I've come for my property, he said flatly. Your what? My horse. Last I checked, the sheriff said, tapping his badge, horses can't be owned if they weren't stolen. He followed her. That's not theft. That's choice. Then she's stolen with influence. She's 12. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. Where is she? He asked coldly. But Jasper had already moved. From behind the barn, he stepped forward, not in panic, but with purpose. He walked past the bakery, past the people, right into the middle of the street. He stopped in front of Nathaniel. And stared. Everyone paused. Nathaniel smirked. What? Come to beg? But then Jasper did something no one expected. He reared. Not in wild panic. Not to charge. But to reveal. His hooves struck the dusty road and kicked up a leather pouch, one Clara had dropped the day she arrived in town. Inside it? A torn page from a ledger. A note. A bruised drawing Clara had made in the smokehouse, of the bars, the cage, and the face that put her there. Jasper picked it up in his mouth. Dropped it at the sheriff's feet. Sheriff Anders picked it up and read it silently. Then turned to Nathaniel. Looks like this horse just filed testimony. The crowd laughed, not mockingly, but with the force of justice finally breaking through silence. Miriam stepped beside her daughter, who stood trembling on the bakery porch. Jasper returned to her side and lowered his head gently to her chest. And the sheriff turned toward the man in black. Mr. Caldwell, he said, pulling out his cuffs, you have the right to remain. But Nathaniel turned. And ran. Nathaniel ran. Boots thudding against packed dirt, coat flapping behind him, curses flying from his lips. He darted past the town's general store, past the sheriff's office, into the open fields that lined the outskirts of Dry Hollow. Sheriff Anders shouted, "Stop, Caldwell," but he was already too far, cutting between fences, slipping through trees like a fox cornered in its own den. Clara stood frozen on the bakery steps, her breath shallow. Jasper shifted beside her, tense, alert, but unmoving, as if waiting for her signal. Then she whispered, "Go." Jasper bolted. Nathaniel's lungs burned. His mind screamed, not with guilt, but fury. He couldn't believe it had come to this. That horse, that girl, they had turned the town against him. That damn animal had outsmarted him. He reached a thicket near the river bend, stumbled, and leaned against an old oak to catch his breath. Behind him, the sound of hooves exploded through the trees. Jasper. Nathaniel spun, pulling a small pistol from inside his coat, always armed, always paranoid. His hand trembled, more from rage than fear. The white horse stepped out from the trees, slow and calm, as if made of spirit and smoke. He stopped 10 paces away. Nathaniel raised the gun. "You think you've won?" he hissed. "You're just a beast." But Jasper didn't flinch. He simply stared. Not with hate. Not with threat. With truth. Nathaniel's hand shook harder. And then... crack. A branch snapped behind him. Sheriff Anders. He had followed on horseback, slower but steady. He stepped out, rifle raised. "Drop it, Nathaniel." Caldwell turned, gun still in hand, eyes wild. "Stay back. I'm warning you." "You already had your warning." Another sound, hooves again. But not just Jasper. Clara. She had followed too, riding behind Eli on an old cart horse. She slid off and stood at the edge of the clearing, barefoot, trembling, not from fear, but from resolve. Nathaniel's gaze shifted. "You," he spat. "You little liar." Clara said nothing. Then, quietly, "You're not my father." Nathaniel growled, his grip tightening. But Jasper stepped between them. The message was clear. No more. Sheriff Anders took the opening, swift and sure, tackling Nathaniel from behind. The gun flew from his hand, and moments later, cuffs clamped around his wrists. He fought, barked, kicked, but it was over. Justice had arrived. Not with a jury or a judge. But with a girl, a horse, and a town that had chosen to believe the silent witness. Back in Dry Hollow, the people gathered in the town square. Some had doubted. Others had whispered. But now, as Nathaniel Caldwell was dragged through the streets, covered in dust, spitting curses, the truth was visible to all. Reverend Hale stood beside the sheriff. Miriam held her daughter close. Jasper stood near the well, calm and regal. Someone handed Clara a folded coat. She wrapped it around her shoulders, then walked toward Jasper. She didn't cry. She simply leaned her head against his neck. And for the first time since she left Caldwell Ridge, she whispered, "Thank you." A week later, Caldwell's estate was seized for investigation. Testimonies emerged, from former maids, ranch hands, townspeople who had been too afraid to speak until Jasper's actions gave them courage. They talked about locked rooms, cruel punishments, secret documents, bribes. A mountain of truth buried beneath wealth. Now rising. The twist came not in the courtroom, but in the attic. Miriam had returned to the mansion, escorted by the sheriff, to collect old belongings. There, she found an old trunk. Inside, sealed in wax paper, were letters. Dozens of them. From Clara's biological father. He hadn't died in an accident, as Nathaniel claimed. He had survived the war. Wounded. Searching for Miriam and Clara. But the letters had never reached them. Nathaniel had intercepted them. Hid them. The man had died 2 winters later in Arizona, heart failure, alone. Clara would never meet him. But now she knew, she had been loved. Wanted. Not unworthy. Never unworthy. Miriam gave the letters to Clara that night. The girl read them by lantern light, curled beside Jasper's stall, tears running down her cheeks. Not of sorrow, but of release. The past hadn't been kind. But it had not erased who she was. Weeks later, a ceremony was held. In the center of Dry Hollow Square, the townsfolk unveiled a small bronze plaque, mounted at the base of the old sycamore tree. It read, "In honor of Jasper, the horse who stood for truth." He did not speak. He did not run. He stood between injustice and a child, and changed everything. Clara placed a wildflower beneath it. Miriam wept. And Jasper, calm as ever, lowered his head once, then stepped back into the field, where children now ran free and girls were no longer afraid to speak. 2 years passed. The town of Dry Hollow had changed, subtly, but meaningfully. People spoke more softly now. They listened more. The bakery on Main Street had expanded with a new stone oven, and on Sunday mornings, the scent of cinnamon rolls traveled farther than the church bells. Clara was 14 now. Taller. Straighter. The girl who once barely spoke above a whisper now greeted customers at the counter, delivered bread with a confident smile, and sometimes even laughed out loud. But there were still moments, quiet ones, when her hands trembled without reason, or her eyes searched the corners of rooms, just to be sure no locks were waiting. Jasper always noticed. And in those moments, he would simply walk beside her. Not pushing, not pulling, just there. A presence stronger than words. The townspeople often marveled at the bond between girl and horse. "He knows her heart," Lorna Bell would say. "He protected her like a soldier," Reverend Hale added. But Clara never tried to explain it. Because how do you describe the way someone saves you, without ever speaking a single word? One spring morning, Clara found a letter tucked inside a sack of flour delivered from the neighboring town of Elkhorn. She unfolded it slowly. It was from the judge in Austin. Nathaniel Caldwell had finally been sentenced, 7 years for child endangerment, document tampering, and obstruction of justice. He wouldn't be getting out early. The state had made sure of that. Clara didn't say much after reading it. She simply handed the letter to Miriam, who read it in silence. Then mother and daughter walked out into the field where Jasper stood grazing under the wide blue sky. Clara hugged him tight. It was over. Really, truly over. That summer, something else changed. Clara began drawing again. She had once sketched little animals in the smokehouse, crude shapes in charcoal on the floor, just to remember beauty. Now, she sketched Jasper every chance she got. She filled pages with his posture, his eyes, the curve of his legs mid-gallop. One afternoon, Reverend Hale stopped by and glanced at one of her drawings. "You ever think of sending these to the Capitol?" he asked. "They've got an art school there. For talented ones like you." Clara blinked. She had never thought of herself as talented. Just someone trying to remember. But that evening, she looked at her pile of sketches and thought, maybe remembering was a kind of art after all. In late August, during the town's annual Harvest Festival, something unexpected happened. As the parade of wagons, children, and music rolled through Dry Hollow, Sheriff Anders stood before the town and raised a hand for quiet. "I've got one more presentation," he said, turning to Clara. He held a ribbon, blue, thick, official, and a certificate in his hand. "This is the first time in the history of our county that we've awarded this to an animal," he smiled, "but some folks ain't animals the way we think. Some are better than people." He turned toward Jasper, standing tall beside Clara. And this one saw what no one else did. And stood up for it. He handed the ribbon to Clara and placed the certificate in a wooden frame. The crowd clapped. And someone started crying. It might have been Lorna, or it might have been Miriam. Jasper didn't seem to notice. He just leaned into Clara, calm and proud. That night, as fireworks lit up the sky in red and gold, Clara sat on a hill with Jasper curled beside her. The town glowed in the distance, and stars peeked through the clouds above. "I used to think I didn't matter," she whispered. "That being small meant being powerless." She paused. "But you showed me it's not about size. Or even voice. It's about standing. Even when you're scared. Even when no one listens. Just stand." Jasper nickered softly. The wind brushed the grass like a lullaby. Years passed. Clara eventually left Dry Hollow for a time. She studied in the Capitol, then worked with children who had been silenced like her, those who needed someone to believe in them, the way Jasper had believed in her. She wrote a book. Titled simply, "The Horse Who Told the Truth." It became a quiet success, passed between teachers, parents, and little girls with bruised voices. She always returned to Dry Hollow in spring, to visit Lorna, to help at the bakery, and to see Jasper. His steps were slower now. His coat dusted with age. But his eyes, still steady. Still watching. One morning, Clara woke early, earlier than usual, and walked barefoot into the field. Jasper stood near the tall oak tree. He didn't turn as she approached. He didn't need to. She sat beside him in the grass. Leaned her head to his neck. They stayed like that for a long while. And when the sun rose, golden and warm, Jasper lay down gently on the earth. Clara didn't speak. She didn't cry. She just held him, as he had held her, when she was scared, alone, caged. Now she was free. And so was he. That summer, a small wooden statue was carved and placed beneath the sycamore tree in town. A white horse. Standing. Beside a little girl with her hand resting on his shoulder. No names were carved. Just a line, burned into the base. Sometimes, the ones who speak the loudest never use words at all.